We don't really know the reasons why we believe what we believe. We just believe whatever because it's been handed down from generation to generation. I think it's popular now to be a disbeliever, an unbeliever. To disbelieve in God is actually trendy. Sometimes we just don't know why we believe or can't defend what we believe. The Bible. I don't care about the Bible. I don't even believe in God.
Hey, what's up? I'm Dallas Wade, and welcome back to another worship service. Today I'm going to be responding to a video from a Church of Christ preacher named David Smith. It's the very first video in his series of videos discussing atheism and evidence for the existence of God. In this video, he talks about how and why the world has become so increasingly atheistic, and some of his points I actually do tend to agree with.
We don't really know the reasons why we believe what we believe. We just believe whatever because it's been handed down from generation to generation.
Also, real quick before we get started, I think it's worth mentioning up front that back when I was a Christian, back in the day, I was also a member of the Church of Christ denomination. So finding a Church of Christ preacher talking about atheism and God and the sort of stuff that I talk about here on my channel was pretty freaking exciting to discover. I've spent a lot of time on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok looking for Church of Christ members talking about these sorts of things, but they rarely ever do. And sadly, that's due to the fact that the Church of Christ is much more preoccupied talking about why Baptists and Methodists are going to hell to even bother worrying about atheists and non-Christians in general. And because of that, I am super excited about this series by David Smith because it very well may be the only series about atheism that has ever or will ever be produced by a Church of Christ Christian. So let's see what David Smith has to say about atheism.
Hey everybody, welcome to our virtual Bible study for this Wednesday. We are glad you have tuned in to be with us.
And I am glad to be tuning in, Mr. David Smith.
We're getting ready to start something brand new tonight, and I hope you'll hang with us for this study. I think...
Oh, trust me, I'm hanging in. I've already subscribed and activated the bell icon, so I am the very first viewer now every time you upload a new video. I'm hanging in there.
I think as far as this area of study is concerned, the world is in a real crisis. We have coming up a brand new study starting on the existence of God. We've never had a dedicated study just on the existence of God, and I'm really looking forward to that.
I actually don't know of any Church of Christ that has ever done a dedicated series on evidence for the existence of God, and I've been keeping up with the Church of Christ for 27 years now. From my experience, the Church of Christ just doesn't really concern itself with non-Christians, whether it be Muslims, Jews, Hindus, or even atheists. The Church of Christ tends to focus its efforts on other Christian denominations, whether it be Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, or Pentecostals. Which, to be fair, the Church of Christ is absolutely right about Pentecostals. They're fucking idiots.
Hallelujah! Saramos, siritaramaro, saramos, siritaroya, iri saromora, shasiritarayaro,
But I just want to talk tonight about why, at this juncture in history, why this is a good direction for us to go in our study. I don't think I need to convince you that there are tonight, in this day and age, right now today, far less people who believe in God than in ages past.
That's true. Proportionally, there are more atheists today than there were 10 years ago or 100 years ago, and probably more than there were 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago.
You agree with that, right?
I do agree with that. So far, we are on the same page.
That we live in an age where there just aren't a lot of people who believe in God anymore.
And now we are not on the same page because I absolutely do not agree with you because you are absolutely wrong. Yes, proportionally, there are more atheists than there used to be, but despite that, the overwhelming majority of people still do believe in a God or gods. And the majority of those people believe in your God specifically, the God of the Bible.
And I don't mean at all people who just aren't religious who believe in God. I mean just giving up on the idea of God completely. The truth is, and if you'll study it statistically.
If you study it statistically, the statistics go against what you're saying pretty strongly. According to recent studies from Pew Research, in the US, while roughly 28% of the population considers themselves to be religiously unaffiliated, only 5% call themselves atheists and 6% agnostic, making only 11% of the US population people who do not believe in a God or a higher power. Don't get me wrong, that's a lot of people, and a heck of a lot more than it used to be, but to say that there just aren't a lot of people who believe in God anymore,
There just aren't a lot of people who believe in God anymore.
is not accurate at all. Roughly 89% of the US population does believe in some sort of a God, or at least some kind of a higher power, and 65% is specifically Christian. So while I don't know what statistics you are referring to specifically, since you failed to mention your sources, I can only assume that whatever statistics you were looking at, you must have been looking at them sideways, or backwards, or upside down, because the picture that you are painting is quite the opposite of any study that I have ever seen out there. I really hope that in the future parts of this series you will cite some of your sources, because that would be really helpful.
I think we have to be reminded often of where our world is heading, because in a minute I'm going to talk about why that's important. It directly affects the way we interact with the world. I know from personal experience, and if you're a member of the church, you likely have noticed.
I'm going to stop David Smith right there just to give a few little side notes for those who may not be familiar with the Church of Christ denomination. But the Church of Christ denomination doesn't consider itself to be a denomination, even though they absolutely are.
The Church of Christ is not a denomination.
The Church of Christ is not a denomination. The Church of Christ is not a denomination.
Why is the Church of Christ not a denomination? Because it's the church of the book and only the book.
I'm afraid we're raising, or have raised, a generation of young people who do not realize that the Church of Christ is not a denomination. Larger congregations, even of the churches of Christ now, are sometimes claiming to be just another denomination. But they're not the Church of Christ if they are.
And also, anytime a Church of Christ member refers to a member of the church,
And if you're a member of the church,
they aren't just referring to any Christian. They are referring to a Church of Christ member specifically and exclusively. Because anytime a Church of Christ member refers to the church, they aren't using it as some all-encompassing term to refer to the global amalgamation of Christians as a whole. They're using it as a disguised term to refer to their denomination without actually referring to it as a denomination. And also, anytime a Church of Christ member refers to a Christian, they aren't just referring to any Christian. They will only ever refer to Church of Christ members as Christians. Because to a Church of Christ member, Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians and etc., are not Christians. They are false teachers, or people who are following the false teachings of false teachers. So a Church of Christ Christian will never refer to a Baptist as a Christian, because in their eyes, in their worldview, those people aren't Christians. Only Church of Christ members are Christians.
in the last decade, you could back it up, maybe the last 20 years, there has been a steady stream of young people leaving the church.
I do believe that David Smith was referring specifically to the Church of Christ denomination here, even though he never specified that, but this does still apply to Christianity as a whole, because it's true in both cases. A lot of people are leaving Christianity, and a lot of people are leaving the Church of Christ denomination, and most of the people in both cases are in fact young people. According to surveys from the ARIS and Pew Research, in 1990, the US population was roughly 86.2% Christian, 76.7% in 2001, 76% in 2008, and now 64% as of 2020. Now, if we look at the Church of Christ denomination specifically, in 1990, the COC made up roughly 1% of the US population, 1.2% in 2001, 0.8% in 2008, and as of 2020, roughly 0.33%. So in that 30-year period, while the Christian population is down a negative 25.75% of what they were, the Church of Christ population is down a negative 67% of what they were just 3 decades ago. So while the decline of Christianity is certainly concerning to Christians, the decline of the Church of Christ denomination is exponentially more so concerning to its members.
There has been a steady stream of young people leaving the church. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed that. In fact, I was one of the young people who both left the Church of Christ denomination and Christianity as a whole.
Here's where I see it. I see a lot of younger people grow up. They get in high school and they clearly carry, it's just written all over their face, a disinterest in the church. Maybe when they were kids, they were really involved and they went to Bible classes and they were really enthusiastic. And then you sort of see the change on their face. And even if their parents bring them to services, they're just sort of blank face. They're there. They don't really care. Now, that's not everybody. I want to be very clear. That's not everybody, but it's a lot of them.
I do think that's probably true for a lot of people, especially in the Church of Christ, because just to be brutally honest, the Church of Christ is extremely boring.
The Sabbath is the seventh day of the week. Obviously, we understand that. This is the day after. It's called the first day of the week. The word Sunday, you're not going to find that used in the Bible. The land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
Well, if you'd like to open up to the book of Ecclesiastes, what we want to try to do today is just look at an overview of some of the things around the book of Ecclesiastes. We're following it after the book of Proverbs.
And it doesn't do a great job of engaging with or catering to younger members. One criticism that the Church of Christ often has of other denominations is that they are all milk and no meat, and I think that's largely true. But one criticism that I have of the Church of Christ is that they are skipping the milk altogether and just feeding everyone steak, including the young members, which is exactly why so many of them are leaving to go to another church where they can get their milk, even if that's all that they will ever get. And the sad part about all of this is that some of these young people will end up leaving the Church of Christ and finding themselves in a Pentecostal church.
By the time they get to college, I see it, you probably see it too, I think you see it, they're just never the same. And the vast majority, especially when you move down to within the generation of the millennials, I mean, it's high percentage. You're talking of those that were previously involved in the church, it's above 90% who leave the church.
Where in the world are you getting these statistics from?
9 out of 10 people within the millennial generation are leaving in droves, religion behind, and much of it is spurred from the fact that they don't believe in a creator anymore. They don't believe in God.
I'm sure that's true for some people, but being a millennial myself who both left the Church of Christ denomination and Christianity, I can say that this wasn't true for me. When I first left the Church of Christ denomination, I went to a Baptist church, and obviously I was still a Christian, so I still believed in a God. But even a few years later, when I ultimately left Christianity altogether, I still believed in a God and a creator. I didn't immediately become an atheist after leaving Christianity. I was still a theist for a year or two after leaving Christianity. I didn't leave Christianity because I didn't believe in a God anymore. I left Christianity because I no longer believed that the Bible was true, but I still believed in a God or a higher power.
And the younger you go, like for example, if you move to millennials and you go to Gen Z, it's even higher among Gen Z population that do not believe in God.
Breaking news, 12 out of 10 Zoomers are leaving the Church of Christ according to statistics.
I mean, this is an astounding number of people, and you think, well, how do we get here?
I'm pretty sure it has everything to do with the internet and the easy access to information now. I mean, used to just a couple decades ago, you were pretty much confined to your family and your community and the culture held within it. But now you can hear anyone from any part of the world share their beliefs and explain their beliefs, and you can compare your beliefs to theirs. You can fact check people now. You can fact check your parents. You can fact check the elders and the preachers at your church. Used to, that wasn't really easy to do, but now you just log into social media or TikTok or whatever, and you're going to see somebody who has different beliefs from you, and that's going to challenge your beliefs. And ultimately, if your beliefs don't have a solid foundation in reality, there's a pretty good chance that you, or at least a number of people in your congregation or your family who used to share the same beliefs, some of them are inevitably going to leave if those beliefs aren't just rock solid. And that's exactly why so many people are leaving Christianity and the Church of Christ now, because the Bible and Christianity aren't built on rock solid evidence or proof or even reasoning. It's all built on faith, which the Bible pretty much admits itself.
If you go back to the 20s and the 30s, like the 40s, just prior to after World War I, World War II, during that era, and before that, even before that, I mean, really, you can go back to the founding of America and you look at the founding of America and what we believed about it. We've come a long way since then.
I agree, we have come a long way. Women now have the right to vote, gay people now have the right to get married, and we finally realized as a country that it is a very bad thing to own other human beings as property. That's probably not the point that you were going to make, though. You're probably going to make the point that the world has gotten worse over the last few decades rather than better, and that's kind of an odd opinion to have in light of those things alone.
There used to be almost a universal belief in the existence of God. If you did not believe in God, if you did not believe in a creator who made this world in which we live, you were the minority. And I mean, you were a really small minority.
And you still are in the minority if you don't believe in a God. Sure, it's a larger minority than it used to be, but it still is the minority.
We are in trouble in this world. We're in trouble in this world when it comes to belief in the existence of God, because that majority is now gone.
But it's not, though.
The people who believe in God are now, I think, probably in a minority.
No, you're not. That's just blatantly not true. The overwhelming majority of people, both globally and in the US, do in fact believe in a God or gods, and most of them believe in your God.
And even among those who believe, I don't know that there's strong belief in people who believe in the existence of God anymore.
That is literally just speculation, though. It's not for us to decide if someone else has strong beliefs or weak beliefs. We don't have the ability to do that. Only an individual can know if their beliefs are strong or weak unless they tell you.
You just see this ever steady stream of agnosticism and atheism and skepticism. And
well, there's nothing wrong with skepticism unless your religion can't hold up to scrutiny.
This infidelic type of heresy clinging thought today that just rejects not just truth, but the source of truth, which is God.
No, I'm not rejecting the source of truth. I'm rejecting your baseless assertion that your God is the source of truth, because you haven't even proven that. In fact, you haven't even proven that your God exists in the first place, much less that your God is the source of truth.
So why is this happening?
That is what I'm here to find out.
I'd like to give you just a couple of thoughts real quick, and then we'll kind of wind it down. This is not a long video tonight. Liar! Again, this is just the introduction to the introduction. So why is this happening? Well, why is this going on? Well, I would suggest that there is likely a lack of conviction, a lack of understanding, and a lack of knowledge, a lack of belief in authority figures who are supposed to be passing along these truths to future generations. And we're not doing it.
I don't agree with your assertion that there is a lack of conviction and belief among Christians, but I do believe that there is a lack of understanding and knowledge among Christians. And for all the same points you made, I do believe that this is contributing to a lot of young Christians leaving the church because their parents and their pastors or preachers or elders or whoever it is that they look up to in the church don't really have the answers that they are asking questions about. And that's definitely discouraging, because that is something that I experienced when I was a young Christian. Even if you get answers from your Christian elders, they usually aren't satisfactory answers. In fact, they never were in my case. So yeah, I do agree with a lot of your points, although I don't agree with the idea that it's because these Christians lack conviction and belief. I think it's just that they lack understanding and knowledge. But sure, I think you're making some really good points. And I do think that these are all things that Christians should be worried about if they're wanting to fix the problem of young people leaving the church.
Which would lead me to number two. I think the second reason is we're not training our children to believe. We're not challenging their thinking. And I don't mean with error. We're not teaching them to be thinkers, use good common sense, and putting two and two together in the universe and coming away with absolute truth. We're just not teaching that.
Again, for the most part, I do agree with you here. Christian parents tend to teach their children what to think rather than how to think. Definitely not all Christian parents, but fundamentalist Christian parents definitely do this. And I can only imagine that just a few decades ago, this was a lot more effective than it is today. Because used to, if you told your children what to believe, they could go their whole life experiencing little to no pushback against their beliefs. Especially if you lived in a small town where pretty much everybody believes the same thing. If you live somewhere like Jones Chapel, Alabama, you're probably not going to run into a Muslim or a Hindu or a Jew or an atheist. You're probably not even going to run into a Catholic. But now, even if you do grow up and live your whole life in Jones Chapel, Alabama, you're probably still going to get on the internet. It might be dial-up internet, but you are still going to get on the internet. And chances are guaranteed that if you do get on the internet, which you will see people and hear from people who don't believe like your parents believed and like your parents taught you to believe. And because of that, you will inevitably learn that there are people out there more intelligent and more knowledgeable than your parents. And that is exactly why there are so many more young people today than there were 2 or 3 decades ago leaving their religions and leaving their denominations, because now it is pretty much guaranteed that whatever beliefs your parents gave you, you will have challenged. And on top of that, it's also just easier for you to fact check your parents than it used to be. So now all of the Christian parents who taught their children what to think rather than how to think are now getting bit in the butt.
When you lack conviction and you don't pass that conviction on to your children grow up twice as less convicted as you are. I think that's happening.
I don't know about that. I don't think we should be judging someone else's conviction. If someone says that they believe in something, then we should just accept that they believe in that thing. If someone's conviction is or isn't strong, that's their place to know about that. It's not our place to speculate about it.
I'm really convinced of that we aren't convicted. We don't really know the reasons why we believe what we believe. We just believe whatever because it's been handed down from generation to generation without really testing it to know how it's true and why it's true. And then since we don't do that, we can't possibly hand that off to our kids. And our kids are suffering the consequence of that lack of conviction in their authority figures. Moms and dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles, things of that sort. Even church leaders. Sometimes we just don't know why we believe or can't defend what we believe. And they see that. And that lack of conviction transfers to them in a complete loss of faith.
You pretty much nailed that one. Although I wouldn't say that these people lack conviction, I would say that they lack understanding. But for the exact reasons that you gave, I would agree with all of that. Because yes, most Christians were raised Christians. Roughly 70% of all Christians were raised Christian, meaning that only 3 out of every 10 Christians are actually Christians because they looked into it from an outside perspective, while the overwhelming 7 out of every 10 Christians were just indoctrinated into it from childhood, which means that it is very likely that most Christians' faith isn't actually rooted in some sort of evidence or argument or reasoning, but rather a product of the environment that they were born into.
Why is it happening? Well, I think it's popular now to be a disbeliever, an unbeliever. To disbelieve in God is actually trendy now. Giving up on God, rejecting God is so popular right now. And I think people latch on to popular ideas. They don't want to be the oddball. Nobody wants to be a sore thumb and sort of stick out. But I think that's happening.
That really doesn't make sense though, because clearly Christianity is much more popular than atheism. So if young people were just going to believe in whatever was popular, then they would be Christians. They wouldn't be leaving to become atheists.
I think that because of the popularity of it, it's much more easy for people to just sort of move in that direction, whether they're convicted of it or not, whether they believe that to be the truth or not.
But it's not easier to be an atheist. It is much easier to be a Christian, especially if most of your family, friends, and community, and politicians, lawmakers, and government officials are all predominantly Christian, which they most likely are if you live in the United States, especially if you live in the southeastern United States. It is a major inconvenience to leave Christianity, especially to become an atheist, because most people around here believe that atheists are evil and satanic and do awful, terrible things. Most Christians around here will disown you and excommunicate you if you become an atheist.
I mean, but what is an atheist? I don't really get into that. You know, when I've talked to people all the time, I'm an atheist. I just walk away. I don't know what to say to you. You know,
well, an atheist is someone who doesn't quite believe that there is somebody out there, some God out there.
Well, then to me, you're an idiot.
So no, your point is just completely invalid. It is much easier to just stay a Christian, even if you don't believe in it. Just to pretend to be a Christian is much easier than becoming an atheist.
And then I would probably add another. You could probably think of some, but I would add the corruption in the educational system. You know, there was a time when the Bible was taught and the Bible was used as an English reader.
Yeah, and that was a bad thing. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want the Quran or the Vedas or the Bhagavad Gita or the Satanic Bible taught in public schools. And for the very same reasons that you know that those shouldn't be taught in public schools, the Bible shouldn't be taught in public schools either.
Science rejected the idea of change from one kind to another.
Okay, and 500 years ago they rejected the heliocentric model of our solar system, so what's your point? That our scientific understanding of the universe doesn't advance over time?
Because it's anti-science?
Evolution is not anti-science. It is literally accepted and supported by every relevant branch of science. But this video is already running a bit long, so I am not going to get into the depths of evolution, but if you do bring evolution up in a future part of this series, then maybe we can dive into it there.
Can't violate the law of biogenesis.
Biogenesis is absolutely not a law. It is not a scientific theory, and until you can provide some evidence or peer-reviewed papers showing otherwise, then it is nothing more than a baseless assertion supported by nothing more than your own uneducated opinion.
You can't twist and amend the laws of thermodynamics.
If you think that evolution conflicts with thermodynamics, then you don't understand evolution or thermodynamics.
And so, you know, Darwin comes along and people scoffed at the idea of evolution, but it's just mainstream now.
I wonder why it became a mainstream science. I wonder if it has anything to do with all of the evidence supporting it, like the fossil record, homology, taxonomy, vestigial structures, and not to mention the fact that we can and do and have observed evolution actually taking place across generations of species today.
So I think all those factors have led to the populism of atheism. It's just popular these days.
No. It's not that it's popular, it's that this scientific information that you're referring to is actually easily accessible now. So more and more people are finding finding out about it and getting educated and learning that these scientific facts about the universe don't line up with the Bible and especially Genesis. And so a lot of Christians are now faced with this dilemma. They can either choose to believe in something that's backed up by evidence, or they can choose to hold on to something that is backed up by nothing more than faith.
And we're in trouble. No nation can survive. No people can survive. The abandonment of the knowledge of God. You do that, you're in trouble.
Why can't we survive without the belief in God? And how are we in trouble if we abandon a worldview based on nothing more than faith? You can't just say stuff like that without actually backing it up, because it's nothing more than a baseless assertion. I have no reason to believe that this stuff that you're saying is actually true.
We're quickly giving up on God, and we have an obligation to do something about it. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, the Bible says, "Sanctify the Lord God in your heart, and be ready always to give an answer to everyone that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you, yet with meekness and fear."
Yep, the Bible certainly says that. So where is your proof? Where is your proof that the Bible is true? And where is the proof that your God exists? I'm waiting.
And so, yeah, we have to have the right attitude, but God places the impetus upon us. I mean, we bear the burden of defending His truth.
That's just silly, though. The idea that an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God needs a portion of His creation to defend His existence from the rest of His creation that doesn't believe that He exists simply because there is a lack of sufficient evidence of His existence.
We bear that responsibility of being His defenders upon this earth. So when someone says there is no God, what a silly idea it is to believe in God. It's time to roll the sleeves back and put the fists up spiritually, so to speak, and go to war for God.
Again, that's just silly. If this God actually wanted people to believe that He actually does exist, then He should just try providing some actual proof that He does exist. Like maybe just show up and talk to people, or at the very least, He could at least audibly answer our prayers. Why is it that instead of doing something like that, this God is relying on charlatans and desperate believers using logical fallacies and emotional manipulation to convince the rest of the world, who is reasonably skeptical of His existence due to the absolute lack of proof or sufficient evidence? That's just silly.
We have to be able to take what information is being given by an anti-God atheistic thinker and show them how that rationale is not correct, so that they can then believe in God.
Yeah, that's true. If you want to convince me that your God exists, then you should be able to do, at bare minimum, those things.
And then I think the last thing would be, if we don't do this, we might as well hang the hat up with evangelism.
I agree. You should.
You cannot go to a person today and say, you know, I know that you've been struggling in your understanding of the book of Galatians, and I'd like to do this as a way of helping you to the truth. And they're, you know, today people look at you and go, the Bible? I don't care about the Bible. I don't even believe in God.
Dude, this has literally never happened to you. You live in Tennessee. 81% of the population there is Christian.
So you have to be able to convince people of Scripture. And so I'm thinking that today, if we are not convicted and well-versed on and proficient in and be able to explain the existence of God, then there's a lot of people we will never reach, right? You don't get the chance to go and sit down in a coffee shop with Joe Schmo, who's a younger fella who's intellectually, he may not be dishonest, but he's just not convinced of God. He's never been shown. And he starts throwing out arguments, and you say, well, I just feel like there's a God. That's not going to do it.
Amen to that.
In order for you to get to that man's heart, and for me to get to that man's heart and convict him and teach him about Jesus Christ, he's got to believe that the message God gave us is true. And before you can do all that, the starting point is God.
I agree. I'm just waiting for you to actually show me proof that this God exists.
There are a lot of folks in this world who, if you go to them and you try to talk to them about being a member of the one church.
And by the one church, he means the Church of Christ. Exclusively.
Talk to them about being a member of the one church. We talked about that. That's really important. You can't be a member of something else and go to heaven.
Did you catch that?
If you go to them and you try to talk to them about being a member of the one church, we talked about that. That's really important. You can't be a member of something else and go to heaven.
Church of Christ members are usually pretty subtle about it, but they do in fact believe that all other members of all other denominations of Christianity are in fact going to hell. And David Smith just admitted to it.
That's really important. You can't be a member of something else and go to heaven. But you're never going to convince them of the one church until you've convinced them of God. So I hope you'll stick with us. I hope you'll be back and stick with us. We're going to try to present this in the best way we can. If you have a question and you want to talk about it, let's get together. Now, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to get together and just waste time because you're not being honest and I'm not being honest and neither one of us are just going to look at evidence. I'm not going to do that. But if you're interested in truth, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we'll sit down. I'll buy you lunch and we'll sit down and talk over lunch. Let's talk about it.
I mean, if you actually do want to do that, then I would take you up on that. I think you're like a 2 or 3 hour drive from where I'm at right now. So yeah, I'd take you up on a cup of coffee or a lunch.
The evidence is there to believe God exists. That's what we want to do. We want to really munch on the evidence for the existence of God. I know He's real. Hey, come be with us. And until the next time we're together, I want you to know I love you. And the God who does exist, He loves you even more than I do. I'll see you next time.
I have spent over a decade now trying to find some evidence for God to, munch on, but I've never been able to actually find any. But I do try to always be open-minded, and so I am going to keep my mind open to the possibility that you, Mr. David Smith, do potentially have some evidence. So let's hope that you do, and let's hope that you don't disappoint, and let's hope that at the very least, the remaining parts of the series will be insightful, educational, and at the very least, entertaining. So thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next worship service.